Yo, CrumbleBob, back again. Today I've got a brand new batch of the best stories from the endless depths of Reddit. All I ask is a like on this video and a subscription to your old pal Bob. And with that, let's get started. Our next Reddit post is from Malakisa. So the day after Christmas, about 10 years ago, my brother called me up and asked for some assistance setting up his new computer. He lived down the road from a store that specialized in discount china, so naturally it was extremely busy, meaning cars were parked everywhere, including on the grass in front of the store, and it was impossible to see around the corner of these cars if someone wanted to pull into the road. Unfortunately, the speed limit, which was 50 miles per hour, was also extremely fast. So while I was driving to my brother's place, I decided to play it safe and was driving about 30 miles per hour while going past this store. Even at this speed, when some guy decided to pull out into the road without checking, I couldn't stop in time to avoid hitting him. Now, I was driving an older Mitsubishi that already had some damage, and he had a small dent in his fender. So I got out of my car, took a look at the damage, and turned around to see a furious, older, red-faced gentleman in front of me. Right after I tell him that it doesn't really look like much damage, so there's no need to contact the police, he proceeds to scream in my face about how I was speeding, and this is all my fault. Oh no, honey. A young woman driving by herself may appear to be easily intimidated, but I was trying to be nice. If you want the police involved, let's do it, buddy. I called the non-emergency line, explained that there was a very minor car accident, and the other driver was insisting it was my fault, so I would feel more comfortable if the police were involved. The dispatcher took my information, paused for a moment, and then quietly thanked me for calling the correct number, adding that she also felt it would be safer for me if officers were dispatched. After a 30-minute wait, an officer arrived at the scene. Not being a total moron, I sat quietly in my car and waited for him to approach me. The other driver felt it necessary to jump out of his vehicle and run over to the officer, starting to scream and gesture wildly. I didn't catch what he said, but I did notice the look on the cop's face, and I grew increasingly amused. After the cop clearly instructed the guy to return to his car, the officer came over to me and asked what had occurred. I explained to him what was happening and that not only had I deliberately been driving under the speed limit, but I had actually slowed down due to how busy this business was. He nodded and went back to measure the skin marks on the road, confirming he believed I was actually doing about 25 miles per hour and complimented my safe driving. The officer then proceeded to write the other driver a ticket, after which the other driver pulled out of the parking lot a second time with his window down and flipped me off. At this point, the cop came over to me and explained that he wrote the ticket up as the other driver's fault. He said that he estimated about $1,000 of car damage. The cop also said, "Darling, I don't say this often, but I believe you should take that man's insurance company for every dime you can get. Thanks, other driver, for insisting that we call the police." And then beneath that, we have a similar story from Burr Sugar. One day when I was 21, I walked into my credit union and I made the final payment on the car that I bought when I graduated from high school. I decided that I'd go hang out with my grandma, so I started the 1-hour drive. I was on a country highway doing 55 miles per hour when the car in front of me stopped short and I had to really slam my brakes. I missed the car in front of me, which promptly drove off, and the car behind me missed me. I looked in my rearview mirror, and I saw a very pained look on the face of the kid driving the car behind me. I was confused for a second. After all, he'd missed me. And then suddenly I was jerked forward in my seat. The car behind him hadn't reacted quickly enough, so that car rear-ended him, and his car rear-ended mine in turn. There was enough time between him stopping and her hitting him that she couldn't have been paying attention at all. So here we are in a minor 3-car wreck. Me and the kid behind me jumped out right away to assess the damage. I had just paid off my car and I was furious. The kid in the car behind me, who later told me he was 17 years old and had only just gotten his license, was shaking and nearly crying, talking about how this was his dad's car and his dad was going to kill him. And then the third driver got out yelling and demanded, "Who was driving the gold car?" I explained that was me, and she started yelling at me for causing the accident. She was making payments on her car, and that it was all my fault that it was wrecked. Her bumper was in pretty bad shape. She said she was 19 years old. I told her that this was in no way my fault, that the 17-year-old and I had safely come to a stop before she hit us. She was not having it and insisted that we call the police. The poor 17-year-old kid was genuinely crying by then. I had told the girl that the person who rear-ends someone is always at fault, so he was freaking out that he would be in trouble since he technically rear-ended me. The girl had this crazy smirk on her face, confident that this was going in her favor. Not only did the cops give the girl a ticket and informed her the whole thing was her fault, but her insurance also turned out to be expired by several months, and she was arrested. I had never seen anyone go from smug to panicking in such a short period of time. So I suppose if you're dumb enough to drive around without car insurance, you're also foolish enough to demand that someone call the cops when you are the criminal. Our next Reddit post is from Bribertronic. I'm a hairstylist. Last Wednesday, between clients, I went to the gas station to get an energy drink, and I was hit by a car coming out of the parking lot. My car was totaled. The cops came and both cars were towed from the scene. I texted my next client, apologizing and telling her that due to a serious accident, I would have to reschedule her appointment. My client said that she absolutely had to get her hair done before the 4th of July. I was standing in the street looking at my car in pieces, on the phone with insurance, fielding questions from the cops, and yet I still texted the salon owner asking if someone could take my clients for the day. The owner said she'd figure something out and would make sure my client could still be seen. I passed this info on to the client, who said she only wanted me to do it and had to get it done ASAP. So amidst all this chaos, I'm still worried about this client, who's a bad client, by the way. She constantly complains about her hair, demands free redos, and only pays about 70% of what's owed. I see in my schedule that I have absolutely no room to fit her in before the 4th of July. So I walked back to the salon after my car was towed away and just took her anyway. Once I got in, she didn't ask if I was okay, and she didn't thank me for making time for her. Instead, she begins a 3-hour-long bragging session about all the guys who are super into her and how she's dating a business mogul from Newport. The service goes as usual. I finish her hair 3 hours later, and I'm about to take off her cape and send her on her way, when suddenly she has a problem with the color. She says it's too ashy. It's the exact same formula and color that I've done for her for years, but today it's wrong for some reason. Trying to remain cheerful and professional, I tell her that I'll put a new toner on her. No problem. At this point, my grandmother is on her way with my daughter to pick me up. I tone the client again, blow dry her hair again, and the client insists again that the color is too ashy. I explain to her that the second toner I use is the most golden color that exists. There's literally no way that I could make it less ashy. She's clearly just being a sadistic B-word. At this point, my grandmother comes into the salon to ask if I'm ready to go. My client is looking at her hair and says, "You have to do something else. I can't leave like this." So my grandmother goes back to wait in the car. I decide to use a very, very gold color and tone her hair again for the third time. She comes back to the chair, and her hair is noticeably less ashy because it's basically orange. "I hate this," says the client. "I'm going to dinner with a guy from Newport tonight. I liked it better the first time. You need to do something else, just like you did it the first time. I've done your hair 3 separate times at this point," I say, packing up my things. As you know, my grandmother and my daughter have been outside waiting for me. Unfortunately, there's nothing else that I can do because there's now 3 layers of toner on your hair, and a 4th layer would just make it worse. I hope you have a great week. I accepted her payment after she scoffed and forcefully handed it to me. Then I left. It probably wasn't my most professional moment, but I've been looking for an escape from that client for years, and it was worth it. Our next Reddit post is from Trance. For clarity on this next post, Collating documents means arranging them so they appear in the correct sequence. So page 1, page 2, page 3, etc. This can be an issue in the printing world because sometimes you print out, for example, 100 page 1s, then 100 page 2s, then 100 page 3s. So then you must collate all these pages together so that each one forms a complete set of page 1, page 2, page 3. Background: I've worked at numerous copy shops for a very long time. I've worked as lead production in several Kinkos, and consequently I can make the copiers pretty much dance to any tune I set. Anyway, I got a job at an incredibly busy, paper-oriented banking company. My boss was a rather stubborn, closed-minded woman who enjoyed insulting her underlings, which included me. When I started, I began streamlining her procedures. Most of her time was occupied by physical labor, which the copiers could do automatically. I pointed this out early on, to which she responded, "That's the way we've always done it, and I like it this way." There was an implied threat at the end of that remark. Thankfully, we worked opposite schedules. So while she was there, it was business as usual, but I was blessedly alone for 6 hours after she and the others left. And let me tell you, tasks got done when I was alone at work. Turnaround times would fall from 1 to 2 days to less than 5 hours. The clients learned that if they brought their projects in after my boss left, they would receive them much sooner. All of this leads to a blow-up. I came into the basement shop early in the afternoon, and there were stacks of paper everywhere. This was a massive collation job, which the copiers could do automatically, of course. I opened my mouth to say that, but my boss screamed, "No, don't touch anything. No touchy. Start working on the next job. I don't want you touching this one. The client is going to get this one on time, not 1 second earlier." I don't think my boss liked this client very much. One time, my boss's husband stared a little bit too long at this client, so there was a touch of jealousy. So I opened my email and started churning out jobs. They were all collation jobs, ironically. Really small, really complicated jobs. They were all done and picked up by the time my boss was packing up to go home. "I'm going home. Don't touch anything. This job is off limits," I confirmed. "This job is off limits. Do not touch it." 5 minutes after my boss leaves, the client calls. "Is boss lady still there?" I tell her no. I have to make massive edits to that job. It's like a whole new project. My boss explicitly told me not to touch that project. If the project isn't done by morning, I'll lose my job. I know that she's over-exaggerating, but I have a way around my boss, so I say, "Send the project to me as a new project. Cancel the old project by email and let the boss lady know, and I'll see what I can do." The client is very appreciative and sends the files over. I set the machines up and everything starts printing. All I have to do is refill the paper and put the automatically collated products into massive binders. Everything was done just before quitting time, and the client was there with her supervisor, observing the process my boss was using versus simply having the machines do it. The client asked, "Why was she doing it that way?" I really don't know, but if I had to guess, I'd say her bonus was tied to her profit. If she does all the collating by hand, then each time we touch a sheet of paper, it costs you money, and it's likely not discounted or included in your contract. The amount probably isn't much, but it can add up, especially at this company. The client and her boss thanked me for getting everything done so quickly, and I went home. The next day I arrived at the copy center, and immediately my boss said, "Go home." She was livid. "Go home. Don't come in tomorrow. I don't care who calls you. You're suspended." I went home and proceeded to go on a massive bender. There was no work the next day, so I turned my phone off. This prevented angry drunk dialing. Before doing so, I texted the client to let her know I'd be out for a couple of days so she could expect production to slow down. During my time off, my boss called and called and called a lot more. She left messages about coming back in and getting work done, etc. It turned out the client's boss called her boss, the CEO, and informed him about the job I'd done. The CEO liked the job I did so much that he wanted to thank me, and the client may have encouraged him to also double-check our contract. They sent us a new order with all the bells and whistles that I usually had the machines do, and the turnaround time was much faster than my boss could manage. I knew I was about to be fired, so I reached out to a former coworker from Kinko's who agreed to hire me. Consequently, I informed my boss I would be quitting. Boss lady was fired a week later. Apparently, the client was angered, which meant that her boss was angered, which the client was angered, which meant that her boss was angered, which meant the CEO was angered. The next Reddit post comes from CyberDizzy. A few years ago, I worked at a well-known pet store, and I was the go-to person for my coworkers whenever they needed advice on aquatic animals, reptiles, birds, or any small animal. I was in the back room cleaning out the cricket bins when one of the newer employees approached me, looking very frustrated. After speaking with them, I found out there was a woman on the sales floor who wished to buy our chocolate chip starfish, but clearly understood nothing about saltwater tanks. She was being unreasonable and had already gone through 2 other associates. Is that a real thing? Chocolate chip starfish? Wait, hold on. There's an animal called a chocolate starfish? I think of all the names in the animal kingdom, that one is the worst. So now we've got a planet named Uranus and an animal named chocolate starfish. I hated cleaning crickets, so I gladly went out to meet the Karen. When I arrived, Karen said, "Finally someone who might actually help me. I want this one here." I looked into her cart and noticed a small box of aquarium salt and a 5-gallon tank. I said, "I'm sorry you've been having trouble, ma'am. Since I'm just stepping into this situation, though, we do have a few questions we like to ask people before selling them live animals. So I'll just run through those with you quickly so we can get you on your way." "Fine. Whatever. Hurry up." "Perfect. What size saltwater aquarium do you have set up at home? And what fish do you currently have in it?" Like I was telling the other kids, I don't have one already. Don't you people listen? I have this one in my cart, and I have the salt right here. I'll set it up when I get home. I want this starfish for my kids. Those were literally the only items she had in her cart. She didn't have filters, heaters, substrate, hides, nothing. Got it. So, ma'am, the issue here is that you have to have your aquarium set up ahead of time before you buy fish, if that makes sense. Also, a tank that size cannot handle this animal, so if you just follow me, I'll show you the size you need. She follows me to the tanks, and I point out a 55-gallon tank. Are you kidding me? Did you see the size of that starfish? No, I want this 5-gallon tank. Well, unfortunately, that's not an option. You'll also need a bit more than just a tank and some salt. Fine. What do I need to get out of here? Here's where the malicious compliance kicks in. I grabbed another cart, and I started gathering all the basics you need to start a saltwater tank, which, for those of you who don't know, is anything but cheap. She was following me around and kept trying to yell at me, but anytime she would say something, I'd interject with, "Oh, this tubing is on sale, good for you," or, "Oh, your kids will love this substrate's color," and she would just get redder and redder in the face. About halfway through, I'd accumulated $500 worth of items, and she yelled at me for being incompetent and for abusing animals by not selling them to loving homes. Then she stormed off. I put everything back with a huge grin on my face, and I called our sister locations to warn them about a potential Karen heading their way. Good job, OP. I think it's pretty obvious that you saved that chocolate starfish's life. I wonder if that Karen was planning on just filling up the tank with tap water, then just dumping all the salt into the tank and calling it a day. Our next Reddit post is from Revelo. Years ago, I worked for a big Canadian coffee and donut shop, mostly working the evening shift. If you aren't familiar with the Canadian brand coffee shop, the cream and sugar are dispensed by a machine that's calibrated to an amount determined by corporate. If you're accustomed to Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts, the amount of sugars and creams you need to order may need to change depending on how much you actually want. One night, we had these 3 bikers drive in, and you could tell they'd been on the road for a while. Their ringleader was your stereotypical biker. Tall, wide shoulders, a big beard, covered in leather. His friends were shorter, but otherwise they still had the whole tough but tired look going on. My coworker was in the back, working on a soup and sandwich. But it was only 3 people, and it had been a slow night, so no worries. I just needed to get these tired boys some caffeine and wish them a good night. The ringleader said, "I want an extra large 12 and 12. Are you sure?" Did I stutter? "Okay, but that's only—" Then one of his friends said, "Did he stutter?" No, he didn't. So off I went to make him exactly what he asked for. I grabbed a cup and placed it under the sugar dispenser while I pressed the ×3 button 4 times. That's 12 extra large shots of sugar. Then I went over to the cream dispenser and did the same thing. Now, fun fact, the cream and sugar dispensers are preset to dispense 1/12 of the cup size you're selecting. So by the time all 12 shots of creamer were dispensed, this cup was basically full. I stirred the creamy sugar mixture around before I poured an itty-bitty splash of coffee into his cup, just enough to bring it up to the safety line of the cup. I tried asking him if he wanted me to heat it up or anything, but I basically got the same exact runaround from him and his friend. Obviously, the guy knew what he wanted, and he didn't need me to tell him what he was ordering. They grabbed the rest of their order and drove out into the night. Now, you would think that was the end of the story. The big, angry biker man got his nasty sugar cream drink, and he left me sitting there, wondering if the rest of the world had been drinking their coffee wrong this entire time. But no, I was lucky enough to be working the next afternoon when he came back in. Mr. Ringleader came back in all by himself the next day and shuffled up to the counter. I could tell that he must have been embarrassed because his voice was a lot softer this time. He knew that he messed up. The glorious aftermath is that he apologized, and he confirmed the drink had been utterly disgusting. It turns out that he was used to Starbucks, and they use way smaller measurements for their cream and sugar. Once I knew where he was used to ordering from, I made him approximately the same drink using our measurements and sent him on his way. I only wish that I could have seen his face when he took that first sip. Down in the comments, everyone's talking about what they order at Starbucks, and I'm completely lost. I don't drink coffee and I never go to Starbucks, so I don't know what a 12 and 12 is. I don't know what a venti is. There's someone down here talking about a triple. I have no clue what that means. And there's a conversation going on about how some guy orders 20 shots of espresso like it's a big deal, and I guess that's a big deal, but I honestly couldn't tell you. Keep in mind, my wife is Chinese, so I've been to China a few times, and every time we go there, we go to tons of Chinese tea houses. In my opinion, there's not a cup of coffee in the world that can rival authentic Chinese tea. I drink a cup daily while I create r/videos. The next Reddit post is by Nate Gallen. Some years back, I was employed at a bustling corporate sit-down burger restaurant. One day I'm rushing through the lunch rush, and 6 college guys take a seat. One guy signals me over and loudly declares they're ready to order immediately. "What will you all be having?" I inquire. "Guys," the same guy says, a smirk on his face. "Guys, that doesn't strike me as a very professional greeting. I also work at a restaurant, and if I approached a table and asked, 'What are you guys having?' my manager would certainly inform me that was unsuitable." The other guys at the table appear somewhat uncomfortable with this exchange and simply sit there in silence. The lead guy glances at all of them and continues, "Why don't you approach us again and do it properly?" At this point, I'm surveying my huge section of tables and getting the clear impression that I'm going to be stuck at this table indefinitely. I'm attempting not to lose my composure, so I smile. "Certainly," I say. I step back several paces and approach again. "Gentlemen, how are you all doing? Are you prepared to order?" The lead guy smirks and gives a nod. I look straight at him. "How about you, Chief? What will you be having today?" A few of the other guys laugh. He glares at me, but he orders his burger and a drink. I take everyone's order and hurry off. I return with drinks a little while later. I set everyone's drinks down, doing the main guy last. "Here you go, boss." I leave before he can say anything. Throughout the meal, I call him a different nickname every time. "You need a refill, pal?" "How's your burger, buddy?" Need more ketchup, bro? Can I get that plate out of your way, dude? Any dessert for you, amigo? Need me to split your check, brother? Make sure to leave me one signed copy, muchacho. So, by the end of the meal, this guy is boiling. His friends are loving it, though. As time goes on, the rest of them keep looking at me expectantly, wondering what nickname I'll use next. Finally, they all get up to leave. The lunch rush has ended, so I'm relaxed at this point. I casually walk up to them. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming in. The rest of the group is smiling. I look at the main guy. And you! Have a fantastic day, Hoss. The rest of the guys cheer. They all head out. I grab all their receipts on the table. Surprise, surprise, the main guy left me a 0 for a tip. I didn't care. It was all worth it. OP, I wouldn't sweat it. Based on how this guy acted in your first interaction, I literally don't think it would have been possible for you to get any tip out of that guy. Maybe if you'd given him a lap dance with his burger or something. Our next Reddit post is from my posting name. Years ago, I was an inside sales rep for a company in a very niche market. The company had about 50 branches across the country of various sizes. The smallest company was literally just one person who processed local orders and used hotshots for delivery. Meanwhile, the largest had about 50 employees. In my branch, we only had 6 workers. I was literally the first salesman with a background in anything even resembling sales that my branch had ever hired. Previously, they only hired socially awkward industry professionals, and they had been doing all the selling for over a year until I came on, so expectations were high. When they hired me, we had somewhat heated negotiations over the compensation plan. The job offered a $42,000 base salary with commission, so I was expected to make about $56K, and the cap was $65K. I asked what I was meant to do after I hit the cap, to which they replied, "Continue to do your job," as if I wasn't going to have a problem with generating new business for free. I said that I was going to need a bonus structure beyond the cap if they wanted me to do any more hunting after that point. I made it clear that I'd service my accounts when they called, but they were going to be disappointed if they expected me to make outbound calls, looking for new business after I maxed out my compensation plan, and that I would definitely enjoy the extra time at home with my family. They said they understood, and they hired me. I worked just about 40 hours for almost 2 months before I had jury duty, and I missed a day. My check was around $150 short compared to what it had been, so I complained to payroll. That's when I found out that I was making $21 an hour and was not, in fact, earning a salary. I assumed this was to compel me to be in the office, as they didn't have remote access to a local network that logged our hours. I didn't even receive a prorated Christmas bonus, since that's considered benefits, and you have to work 90 days to receive those. Enter malicious compliance. I discovered that if I left the house 30 minutes earlier, my 80-minute commute would be reduced to under 25 minutes. So instead of showing up at 8:30, I was there at 7 o'clock with the warehouse guy sending out emails. I started working through lunch, eating at my desk, instead of spending an hour off campus or in the break room. I also discovered that if I stayed until 6:30, I'd get home by 7, as opposed to leaving a little after 5 and getting home around 6:30. With the overtime, I was logging over $2,000 more than intended each month. And strangely enough, no one even noticed until the internal auditor checked the W-2s and realized I earned considerably more than the branch manager. I didn't hit my commission cap until late November, so I spent the rest of the year training with the technician or the warehouse guy, both of whom were stoners. They tried to put me on the same salary compensation that I'd originally agreed to, but it was enough of a pay cut to count as constructive dismissal. So I got to quit and still collect unemployment for a month before I found another job. Our next Reddit post is from Magnus. I worked in a building where I was a fire marshal. It offered no extra money and a small amount of extra work, but someone has to do it. I was also the first aider, and I somehow ended up arranging the Christmas night out. So maybe the building manager saw me as an easy target. The only advantage I had was that during a drill or real event, I had absolute power. Anyone not quickly following an evacuation order was called up for disciplinary action. We had about 12 random fire drills per year, and my job was to ensure that the building was clear. Basically, it was my job to stick my head into each office, toilet, kitchen, etc., and ensure no one was left behind. 5-minute stops. Anyone booked into the building who wasn't registered by me was in trouble. The drills were a surprise to me as well, which made the test more realistic. The building manager was a jerk. He exercised his small amount of power as much as he could, and he loved to report people for minor infractions. During one drill, he hid in a cupboard and then summoned me into his office for failing to ensure the building was clear. Apparently, some people might run and hide from a fire instead of leaving the building. He wagged his finger at me and told me to do better next time, or I would lose the marshal role. The building manager informed me that from then on I had to check hiding places too. I later discovered that he had no authority to make that rule. Cue malicious compliance. The fire alarm went off for the first time after my failure to check the cupboards. Everyone left, crossed the road, and stood at the assembly point in the rain and wind. I searched the top floor very carefully. I opened up large cupboards, I opened up boxes big enough to conceal a person, and I looked under each desk in case someone was hiding. Then I went to the next floor. By now, people were cold, wet, and unhappy, but the building manager refused to let them re-enter. The building manager knew the fire drill was coming, so he had dressed for the weather. However, everyone else was mostly just wearing light clothing. I finished the ground floor and went to the basement, which included the boiler and piles of old junk. Clearing the basement took ages because I was very thorough and very slow. I left the building and then I escorted a mass of sodden people back into the building. I was massively unpopular until I told everyone that I was just following the building manager's rules. That basically turned into the equivalent of angry villagers showing up at Castle Frankenstein with torches and pitchforks. People were furious at him. Someone reported the building manager to the site safety officer, who went ballistic on the building manager. He scolded the building manager for forcing me to remain in a potentially burning building for much longer than necessary. Also, the company had to let people go home and change clothes, or else the union threatened to get involved. The building manager faced criticism from all sides: the workers, the union, management, and the site safety officer. Most of the time, if it's just you complaining, nothing really gets done. But if the right people are inconvenienced, then things truly change. Our next Reddit post is from the breakup. A year out of school in the early 1990s, I secured a job as a business analyst for a large family-owned tech company. This business was situated in the thriving heart of technology at the time, and it was highly profitable. As tech expanded over the next decade, the company prospered and stayed family-owned. What began as a rich family in a rich company grew exceedingly wealthy, reaching a net worth in the low billions. The family that owned it was quite neurotic, moody, and had a reputation for being ruthless concerning financing, deal-making, employees, and so on. I truly believe this is what kept them from ultimately becoming a household name as a company. As I advanced in the company, I gained more and more direct interaction with the owners. I worked on some projects directly with the owners, and these were very successful, which gave me even greater access to their inner circle. Now, like many people at the time, especially those who worked in tech, I was heavily invested in tech stocks. I talked about some of my investments and gains with the owners in casual conversation, even though investing had nothing to do with my role in the company. That is, until one day in late 1999, when one of the owners approached me and asked if I would invest some of his personal money. He wanted me to take significant risks using $1 million of his personal money. I was somewhat reluctant, but being only in my late 20s and eager to prove myself, I agreed. I asked for a written agreement, where they recognized this was not my role in the company. It was a private arrangement between the owner and me. Also, it outlined my compensation for this side agreement, which was 20% of all profits. Around this period, by virtue of working in the industry, I began to observe the vulnerabilities of many tech companies. They simply weren't living up to their hype and stock valuations, and some appeared to be running low on funds. I didn't have any inside information, just an instinctive sense of which companies were struggling, given my experience. So I started employing both my funds and the owner's funds to short tech companies just after the new year in 2000. For those unfamiliar with shorting, it means that if a stock's value declines, then your investment's value rises. Well, in the first 2 months of the year 2000, both my account and the account I set up for my boss experienced moderate losses. But then the tech bubble began to burst, and both accounts, but my boss's in particular, started to soar. In June, the company I worked for started to experience a downturn. We were still profitable, but since we provided tech services and products, we were not immune to broader market weaknesses. I had not informed the owner about my short strategy. He approached me one day asking about his money's performance, stating he suspected it was significantly down like the overall market. To his surprise, I informed him there was $135 million in cash in his account, belonging to him. The owner, either from ignorance or a lack of focus, said, "Great, $135 million. Fantastic work in this down market. Will you please wire it to me?" I replied that I would, but I'd be taking my 20% of his $350K, or $70K, before wiring him the remaining $280K. I also reminded him that I still had open positions that I'd yet to settle or close, but I didn't specify the amount. He once again seemed not to grasp or comprehend the open position statement, but instead he became completely focused on and enraged by my rightful claim to the $70,000. He went on and on about how times were tough. I should be thankful for a job, particularly at my young age, and the entire $350,000 was essential for him and the company. I knew for a fact this wasn't true. Even worse, this was my first personal encounter with that family's greed and corruption. Now comes the revenge. Since after 2 separate occasions, the owner didn't seem to understand that the open positions I still held would generate at least some income and thus additional profit, I chose not to mention it again. I sent him back the entire $135 million, and I continued to manage the open positions to the best of my ability. And here's the kicker. The owner never brought it up again. He seemed to believe that the $135 million payment represented the entire value of his account, and he either never grasped or never recalled that the open positions still existed. He never requested records, tax documents, or any financial statements. Given his dishonesty with me, I didn't feel obligated to keep him updated. Ultimately, after a bit more net gain, I closed out my account for an additional $1.8 million. I worked for the company for 3 more years, and the owner never inquired about it during my tenure, after I gave my notice, or since. I know it's a bit crude and even dubious, but given his dishonesty with me over the $70K, I felt justified in keeping the additional $1.8 million. I paid the taxes on my gains and went on my way with a fantastic nest egg. The final ironic cherry on top of this sundae is that during my remaining 3 years, I gained greater influence with the owners because they considered me loyal for returning the full $1.3 million and for not making too much of a fuss about the $70K profit. Little did they know, I got the better of them. The company eventually folded due to family disputes, but my understanding is that ownership walked away in a very good financial position. They likely would have been a much better and greater company had they not practiced the same dishonesty they showed me with their vendors, clients, and employees. You know, the ironic thing about this story is that if OP had taken the $70K, then he likely would have received it. However, the boss would have definitely involved lawyers, and they would have swiftly uncovered that missing money. Thus, by OP yielding to the owner's greed, the owner entirely overlooked that missing cash. Anyway, congratulations, OP. $1.8 million is a life-changing sum of money. Our next Reddit post comes from Cinema Bears. I worked the graveyard shift in a big furniture warehouse, getting furniture ready for next day deliveries. Each prepper was tasked with getting 2 delivery bays ready. To get the furniture ready, we would unbox all of it, attach feet to couches, hardware to dressers, assemble dining room chairs, and perform repairs. Our usual practice was to prepare your bay, and then once you were done, you would assist the next bay. This process would grow until everyone was finished, and then you would get on a cherry picker to retrieve last-minute additions or swap out damaged furniture. Then our workplace decided to put in place a production standard. You were allocated a specific amount of time for each task, right down to the smallest details. If you totaled your assigned time and completed your work ahead of schedule, you received a 10-cent per hour bonus, amounting to 80 cents a day. Additionally, this was meant to stop you from helping other bays, as you weren't given time for others' tasks. So, enter malicious compliance. I was efficient and wasted no movements. I would speed through my bay, tally up my assigned time, and finish 2 hours earlier than I was given. Instead of submitting my sheet and getting 80 additional cents, I sat on the couch at the end of my bay and did nothing until my shift concluded. I recall when a manager approached and requested my assistance. I simply glanced at my watch, then at my beautifully prepped bay, and stated, "I'm still prepping my bay." I replaced my headphones and reclined while he looked at me utterly stunned. There was nothing they could do because I was still clocked in for my bay. I viewed it as more advantageous to be compensated for 2 hours of idleness than to be paid 80 cents for working my butt off. Seriously, OP, I had to go back and reread this account, because for a moment I thought I was misinterpreting something. I was thinking that maybe it was 80 cents an hour, but no, it's 10 cents an hour, up to a maximum of 80 cents a day. What kind of incentive is 80 cents a day? I mean, that would have been a good wage increase in like 1925, but in 2021, who cares? Our next Reddit post comes from Luna Tunes. This occurred the summer before my senior year of high school. My best friend at the time invited me to visit and stay with her and her dad's family in Florida for 2 weeks. To my dismay, I started my period during that vacation. I had brought supplies along just in case, and I discarded them wrapped in toilet paper within the lidded trash can in the shared bathroom. On the 3rd day of the trip, her dad came to me to say that my friend's stepbrother, who lived with them, had seen my period products in the bathroom garbage can. Like, what was he doing? Was he rummaging around in there? Anyway, the stepbrother was disgusted by it. The father asked me not to throw them out there because his son would have to see them again. Again, I'd like to point out that it was much harder to see them than to avoid them. But whatever. I asked the father where he suggested I dispose of my disgusting products to avoid upsetting his son. I thought this was a rather absurd request, since this is a natural bodily process I can't control. But I wanted to do what I could since I was a guest there. But this man just says, "Just hold it in until we go to dinner or something and then throw it out in a public restroom." Sir, you have a daughter. How can you not know that's not how things work? When I asked him what I should do if that's not an option, he said, "Just flush it then so that my son doesn't have to see it." Cue malicious compliance. So instead of wrapping up my used tampon in toilet paper and tucking it into the trash can that has a lid, I'll just flush it down the toilet instead. The first one went down fine. The second time it went down as well, but with a gurgle. But the third one made the toilet back up and overflow. I will always remember the sight of my friend's dad pumping the toilet, only for a partially dissolved, bloody tampon to float on the surface of the bowl. I went back to putting them in the trash can, and he didn't say another word about it. Man, it's amazing how many guys seem to think that girls can just hold it in like they're holding in pee or something. Also, what I want to know is, what was this stepbrother doing that he found something wrapped up in toilet paper in a trash can with a lid on it? I think OP was right. Was he actually digging around inside the garbage can? It's like that old joke. What are you doing, stepbro? Except Really? Seriously? What on earth are you doing, stepbro? Our next Reddit post is from Bat Kevin. I worked as a server for a small, brand new, family-owned restaurant. This place was one step below white tablecloth and had a bar on one side with the restaurant on the other. The owners were awesome and provided industry professionals to train us on how to best treat a customer and maximize our tips. As an example of just how effective this training was, on opening day, I dropped an entire tray of drinks down a woman's back. Yet, this family returned several more times and would only let me serve them. The owner brought them a free dessert the first time they returned. One technique we were taught was to identify who was paying from social cues and make sure they were happy. If a couple enters and you think the man is paying, make the woman feel like a queen. When it's time to settle the bill, she'll likely encourage a larger tip. It's remarkably effective. As I finished taking an order, I observed a family of 4 being seated in my section, and I stopped by right away to introduce myself. My assessment was this: a husband and wife, impeccably dressed, their attractive early 20-year-old daughter around my age, and what I gathered was her boyfriend, wearing a suit and tie. The dad was very clearly paying, but this young, aspiring businessman interrupted the mom as she was ordering her drink to inform me that he would be ordering for the table. If looks could kill, the father would have eliminated this young man and probably 10 people in the bar area. Oh, buddy, your evening is not going to proceed as you expected. Every time I returned to the table, I would face him, only look at and speak to him, and I would turn my back on the father. The daughter requested something, I don't recall what, and without even acknowledging her, I asked him, "May she have that?" He barely stammered out a yes. When I brought the bill, I placed it right in front of him. They lingered for a while, and I kept checking in and refilling drinks while the bill remained untouched. I believe the dad was making him sweat. Eventually, the dad takes the bill and inserts his card. I brought back the receipt and thanked the young man for visiting and walked away. I was elsewhere when they rose from the table, and the young man moved toward the door with a speed that would make lightning appear slow. The other 3 were all smiles, and the dad looked across the dining room and mouthed, "Thank you." I gave him a smile and a nod and continued on my way. The tip amount is a number I don't recall, but I know that it was good. Really good. It must have been a small wedding because I never received an invite. Wow, OP, you truly gambled with that one. Turning your back on the father and completely ignoring him could have backfired tremendously. But instead, it sounds like this father just really relished you making a fool out of this young man. Our next Reddit post is from Gromulax. This story happened just a couple of hours ago, so it's so fresh you can still smell it. We have kids from the local school come to help with our community garden, and they often show up on a Saturday morning as well. They're almost entirely well-behaved, which is fortunate because there's almost nothing we can do about bad behavior other than using a stern voice. Although one time, one of the boys kicked a rabbit, and one of the girls grabbed his shovel and smacked him over the head with it. Rough, but effective justice. There was this one kid who came for the first time last week. I didn't know him, but we tried to make him feel very welcome. He only lasted half an hour before storming off in tears because we had to scold him 3 separate times for spinning around in circles while holding a tool at head height. This morning he returned with his mom, and I saw him point out my friend and me, but he didn't ask to join in after we called out hello, so we left him alone. After about 10 minutes, he started wandering around, and my friend shouted to him, "Don't go around the greenhouse, mate. It's not safe around there." Well, his mom had clearly been anticipating this because she went from 0 to 100 in 2 seconds flat. She demanded to know if we owned this garden, and if not, what right we had to say where her son could go. We explained that we just wanted him to be safe, and she replied that she was quite capable of handling that herself. Thank you. Fine, whatever. So off the kid went exploring behind the greenhouse, which is not safe because that's where the compost heap is, as well as the muck mound, which is a giant pile of horse manure. We get the giant pile of horse manure delivered every autumn. By the spring, the inside is all nicely rotted down, and the outside is hard and crusty and much less strong than you'd think. After about a minute, there was a crunch and a squeal. Apparently, the kid thought the pile was solid, so he tried to climb it, and then it cracked, and he fell inside of it. He was absolutely black from chest height downwards, and well-rotted manure is thick, sticky, and slimy. I like to think that we did a very good job by pulling him out without saying, "I told you so," or bursting into laughter. His mom grabbed him without a word, and they made a dash for the gate. He started bawling once the surprise wore off. My friend asked, "Would you like some garbage bags to spread around in your car?" And to her credit, she did say thanks when he handed them over. I wonder if we'll see them again next week. Tell me you have terrible parenting skills without telling me you have terrible parenting skills. Our next Reddit post comes from Progressive Badger. This happened back in the 80s when I held my first job as a maintenance man at a local hotel. I'd been employed there part-time since age 16, and upon turning 18, I received a summons for jury duty. I chose a week and informed my boss. The hotel's owner, who consistently acted like a complete jerk to all his staff, soon found out. When he spotted me in the hallway, he declared I had to do whatever it took to avoid jury duty, stating he needed me at the hotel that week for a major dog show. He stated if I didn't report to work, I'd be terminated. Once I arrived at jury duty, I was chosen for a week-long trial. The judge then inquired of the jurors if there was any reason we couldn't serve on that jury. When my turn came, I felt nervous. I'd never been in court previously, and I was too afraid to lie. I informed the judge that my employer, the owner of the business where I worked, would dismiss me if I wasn't back today, and that I had to exert every effort to be excused from jury duty, or else I'd be fired. Otherwise, I was perfectly willing to serve. The judge appeared quite displeased. The judge had me approach the bench and requested the owner's name, the location, and so forth. Then the judge passed a paper to the court officer and uttered something to the officer. I was then instructed to return to the jury box. Roughly an hour later, as they were still selecting the jury, the officer reappeared with the owner, who looked visibly shaken, in handcuffs, and was escorted to the front of the judge's bench. The owner stood before the judge. The judge questioned the owner, who apologetically tried to dodge them. Then the judge, looking even more enraged, instructed him that I would be present for jury duty, that I would remain there for as long as needed, and he was not to take any retaliatory action against me. Furthermore, the judge was filing charges, directing the clerk to check with me regularly, stating that if for any reason I was terminated or faced discipline, he would hold the owner in contempt and in violation of a court order, and the owner would spend a considerable amount of time behind bars, pondering the importance of jury duty. The judge then compelled him to apologize to me in court. I was selected for the jury and served for the week. I returned to work the following week. I anticipated some repercussions, but I was never dismissed. None of my shifts were altered, and I received payment for my time on jury duty. I didn't inquire why I received payment. The clerk did follow up a few times, and I was instructed to call their direct number if anything occurred. It was fantastic, and I was essentially bulletproof, continuing to work until I had accumulated enough savings to return to school. Thus, it appears this kind of situation is quite common. In the comments section, we find this story from Texas Yankee. An executive dismissed a woman for attending jury duty, claiming it was crucial for employees to remain at work to produce a company press release. When the lady attended jury duty and was clearly distressed, the judge heard her account and dispatched county deputies to escort the executive out of his office in handcuffs. The executive received a stern lesson in civic duty, and the lady got her job back, though I believe she refused. She secured another job quite quickly. The next Reddit submission comes from Repulsive Basil. I was employed as a broadcast technician on a cruise ship. Among my duties was managing the passenger TV system and ensuring the correct content played on the appropriate channel at the designated time. Most of the channels showed pre-recorded content, but 4, however, were live channels fed by satellite. The ship's satellite dish was meant to automatically track the satellite as the vessel moved, but when the ship performed a 180-degree turn departing port, the dish failed to keep pace. I then need to head to the broadcast room to manually realign the dish. This necessitated me accessing the internet to retrieve the coordinates, which varied based on our global position. Without these coordinates, I had no means of knowing where to aim the dish. Aiming to conserve funds and bandwidth, one day the cruise company mandated that from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., the ship's internet would be restricted to passenger internet cafes and only essential crew, and the broadcast technician position was not included on the list of essential crew. I argued to both the cruise director and hotel director that this would create issues if we lost the satellite dish during those hours, but they remained unconvinced, so I waited. A few days later, as we departed port around noon, the satellite dish lost its connection to the satellite. I sent an email via the ship's intranet to the cruise director, with the hotel director copied, informing them that our satellite TV channels were down, and I would be able to restore them as soon as I gained internet access at 8 p.m. that evening. Approximately 15 minutes later, I was copied on an email from the hotel director to the IT department, which stated, "Please enable the broadcast technician's internet access and add them to the essential crew list." Our next Reddit post is from Marble Chocolate. I worked alongside a man who was incredibly intelligent, always articulate, very amusing, and truly one of the most skilled bartenders I've ever encountered. This particular night was extraordinary. On exceptionally busy evenings, we had 2 people per station, and this was one of those busy nights, so I had a prime view of the situation. This sleazy jerk was standing in front of our station with his elbow on the bar, not facing us. We were getting a bit irritated that he was obstructing others from being served, so Sam gently tapped his arm. "Hey man, can I get you anything?" "In a sec, mate," he replied, shooing Sam away and continuing to hit on this inebriated girl. My friend's demeanor changed, and he responded, "You're blocking people from the bar, man." "Shit or get off the pot." This greasy jerk contorts his face, sizing Sam up and down. "Give me a Coke," he barks. My friend deftly snatches a glass from behind his back, catching it in his left hand, adds ice to the glass, places it on the bar, and tosses a straw into the glass as he dispenses the Coke from the soda gun. "That'll be top 50, he states as he rings up the drink. The jerk stares at the drink. "What's this?" my friend replies with impatience. "A Coke, like you requested." "That's not what I asked for. If I wanted ice, I would have asked for ice." He shoves the glass back towards my friend. My friend picks up the glass with both hands and did something I didn't expect. He apologized. "You are so right. I'm so sorry. How stupid of me. Let me fix that for you." Then he grabs a soda gun and pours Coke all over the bar counter. The jerk yanks his arm away, not because he noticed it, but because his shirt was getting wet. His anger was clear. My friend says, "If you wanted an effing glass, you would have asked for one." Then he throws a straw into the puddle, turns his back, walks away, and flips him the bird. My hero. Our next Reddit post is from I Am Say Cat. This occurred just before I resigned from my last job approximately 4 years ago. I was employed by the largest IT company in my country. It's recognized for being employee-friendly, offering very flexible working hours, excellent benefits, and good salaries. However, the delivery head of our project, who was my manager, held a completely different perspective. Officially, we were expected to work from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., but no one truly worried about it because the sole expectation was clocking in 45 hours a week. Personally, I preferred working late as it meant less traffic on my commute home, so I'd arrive at work around 10 or 10:30. Then, abruptly, the boss decided to become draconian regarding punctuality and office hours. Everyone was now expected to be at their workstations by 9 a.m. We all complied. Enter malicious compliance number 1. Since I was typically the last person to depart each day, I had voluntarily assumed several additional technical responsibilities that only needed attention after everyone had signed off and after the client's day concluded, which was never before 8 p.m. As you might imagine, things immediately descended into chaos when I started leaving promptly at 6 p.m. every day. Needless to say, the boss was utterly distraught and had to stay late himself most nights for a week to finalize the closing tasks. He had always left by 6 p.m. prior to this. He wasn't very acquainted with the process, and he couldn't obtain assistance from the staff because everyone had already left for the day, leaving him in quite a predicament. The boss could have simply reinstated our former work hours. But instead, this is what transpired one fine evening. He asked me, "Why are you leaving now?" I replied, "I'm done for the day. It's 6:30. "But who will handle the technical responsibilities?" he asked. "If I did it, then I'd have to stay for another 2 hours." "Okay, let's review here. Over the past month, you arrived at work after 10 a.m. every single day. That amounts to 20 to 22 hours you were expected to be working, but weren't." I couldn't decide whether to laugh or be furious at his illogical claims. "But I work until 8:30 p.m. every day. So not only are you mistaken, but I actually work 20 to 22 hours more, for which I should claim overtime payments." "Then why didn't you?" he retorted. "Anyway, that's a separate matter entirely. Starting tomorrow, you're either coming in an hour early or staying an hour late for a full month to make up for your shortfall." Enter malicious compliance number 2. At that time, I was preparing for a different high-paying job in the government sector that required passing an exceptionally challenging competitive exam. This demanded a significant amount of time and effort for studying and research. The exams were scheduled in a month, and I was truly struggling because I simply lacked sufficient time. So I viewed this as the perfect chance, a kill 2 birds with 1 stone scenario. I resolved to comply. Beginning at 8 a.m. daily, I would diligently study and research for an hour without any interruptions, utilizing the company's internet, printer, stationery, and any other necessary resources, and I managed to be ready with my work by 9 a.m. For that entire month, I powered my exam preparation using the company's resources, and yes, I also claimed full overtime payment. To be frank, I often felt guilty about this, but the satisfaction I experienced upon submitting my resignation after securing that new job was beyond words. The best aspect of this post, OP, is that not only did you ultimately triumph, but this individual lost, because once you departed the office, all those additional responsibilities reverted to your boss's shoulders. Our next Reddit post is from Dr. Engine. I previously worked in military law enforcement. The major advantage of this over civilian law enforcement is our ability to quickly get your boss's boss, or someone who will severely reprimand you for being incompetent on the phone. However, we also deal with spouses who possess no rank or authority, but behave as if they do. It was a busy day on a larger base. I pulled over a woman for running a very red light. It wasn't even close to having been yellow. She nearly caused a multi-vehicle accident, forcing several cars to swerve to avoid collision. We always had to call in information and await a response before approaching a vehicle. Sometimes, if the dispatcher was slow, you could wait 5 minutes before receiving that response. This consistently annoyed people and made already irritating individuals even more so. After waiting in my car for several minutes for the information, I finally received it and approached her vehicle. "I'm OP with military police. I require your license, registration, insurance, and ID card." She shrieked, "Why did you pull me over? This is harassment." "Ma'am, if you provide those items, I'll gladly discuss this further." This exchange repeated a few more times, me asking, her yelling. Finally, she angrily and forcefully handed me the documents. I already knew where this was headed. While I typically don't engage with this kind of behavior, I was bored, so I thought, why not? "Do you know who I am?" Who my husband is? No, ma'am, I don't. The lady gained a calm sense of triumph. My husband is Captain Doofus, with such and such unit. Well, I'm very sorry about this. If you'd like to get him on the phone, we'll sort this out, and you'll be on your way. So, a side note. We have something called a blotter. It's a report detailing every negative incident that goes to the commanding general, and he reviews the blotter with the unit commanders. Usually, it's a bad day for you if you're on the blotter, and it's not just bad for you. It's also detrimental to your unit, because it makes your unit appear poorly. What's also amusing here is that her husband is merely a captain. If you have a pulse, you'll get promoted to captain. Anyway, the woman called her husband. Honey, some cop pulled me over for nothing. He wants to talk to you. She handed me her phone, and I returned her documents. Captain Doofus, this is O.P. Your wife ran a red light at such and such intersection, nearly causing an accident. She's about to be apprehended for obstruction. Her vehicle will be towed, and your name will appear on the blotter. To be clear, there was no actual intention of arresting her, simply for yelling at me and refusing to provide documents for perhaps 20 seconds. I wasn't even going to issue her a ticket. I just dislike paperwork. Captain Doofus said, Will you please hand my wife the phone back? Her jaw dropped, and her eyes already began to water as I returned the phone to her. From a few feet away, with vehicles passing on a rather busy road, I could distinctly hear him shouting at her. My task was complete, and I returned to my car. Our next Reddit post is from Kara Asha. I'm a former car insurance agent. I once had a caller screaming at me that if I didn't comply with his demands, he wanted us to cancel his policy. What he wanted was illegal, so it wasn't going to happen, regardless of his complaints. After repeated denials, he kept insisting I cancel his policy. I advised him that he really ought to secure new insurance first, as my state has mandatory insurance requirements for active vehicle registration. But he insisted I cancel it immediately, so I did. Well, a couple of days later, he called back, furious because he couldn't find new insurance, and now his driver's license was suspended. Furthermore, he had a court date and was suspended from his job. He had been caught driving without valid insurance. So in addition to the usual problems, he now faced a very costly ticket. His employment also necessitated a valid license, so he was unable to work until the situation was rectified. I cautioned him, but he disregarded it, so tough luck, pal. The next Reddit post comes from Sheet Mask Wine Baking. I'm a part-time home baker. I started doing it while studying from home during the pandemic, and it's primarily a fundraiser for my charity, as I can no longer hold my monthly bake sales on campus. I'm also the only one selling baked goods in my whole area, so my items are quite popular. Specifically, there's one particular type of cake I make that everyone absolutely loves. Recently, a lady called me looking to order 1 pound of this specific cake. She mentioned she'd tried it at a friend's place, loved it, and wanted it for her niece's birthday. I explained that I use metric measurements, so my cakes are actually 500 grams. And just to clarify, 1 pound is roughly 450 grams, meaning my cakes are actually larger than 1 pound. She insisted she wanted a 1 pound cake, so I let it go since it was more or less the same thing. After I took her order and gave her the price, she began providing more instructions. She mentioned the birthday girl was 16, so it should be decorated for a 16-year-old, which are incredibly vague instructions. She also asked me to add various specific items to the cake and write 4 distinct things on it. I explained that none of these additions were included in the base price, and what she wanted would make the cake much heavier and more expensive. She then said, "Make it a 1 pound cake for the 1 pound cake price." Okay, I get the hint. You wanted a 1 pound cake with those particular customizations, so that's exactly what I made. I took out some ganache and created thinner layers to include her additions, ensuring it remained precisely 454 grams. No more, no less. The woman arrived to collect the cake and became furious, accusing me of trying to defraud her under the guise of charity. She claimed the cake I made was definitely not 1 pound. as her friend's cake had been larger. I attempted to explain why her friend's cake might have appeared bigger, and that this cake was precisely 1 pound, just as she requested. She refused to listen, caused a significant commotion, and demanded a refund. So I retrieved my scale and weighed the cake right in front of her, exactly 454 grams. The lady saw the figure and exclaimed, "Aha! I was right. You're trying to swindle me. It's 50 grams short." I replied, "No, that's precisely 1 pound, just as you requested." I opened Google Converter and demonstrated it that 1 pound is exactly 454 grams, not 500. I pulled up our conversation on my phone, showing her the message where I stated I make standard 500-gram cakes, and she had replied that she didn't care. She wanted 1 pound. She seemed a bit stunned, and then declared that I should show some professional courtesy by making it 500 grams, and that I was trying to cheat her. I'd had enough of her. I told her, "Ma'am, you stated you wanted exactly a 1 pound cake. You told me that 4 times. So you can either take this exactly 1 pound cake, or you can take your refund and depart." I could easily find others who would want to purchase this 1 pound cake. She took her 1 pound cake and left, declaring she would never buy anything from me again and would ensure others knew it too. Later, her niece followed my Instagram page and sent me a message, apologizing for her aunt. She said it was the best cake she'd ever tasted and promised to tell everyone about my bakery. The fact that this 16-year-old girl went out of her way to find the original poster on Instagram and apologize makes me suspect her aunt must have spent the entire birthday party complaining about this cake instead of, celebrating her niece's birthday. And it was a sweet 16, which is a significant milestone for young girls. Instead of enjoying her birthday party, this poor girl had to listen to her Karen aunt complain nonstop. Our next Reddit post is from Aussie Golden Doodle. Years ago, I worked at a clothing store that didn't offer commission. It was the brand's first store in my local area, and I stayed with them for about 2 years. They were quite desperate, hiring me on the spot. Anyway, all the supervisors I liked eventually quit, and the ones who remained simply weren't kind. I was the youngest on the team, and they consistently excluded and bullied me. I assume it was due to jealousy, which I never grasped, because even though I received positive customer reviews, we didn't have sales commissions. I simply enjoyed helping, and I loved fashion. I also lived close by, so they frequently called me in to cover for others. I was always flexible for them, but this one supervisor just had it in for me. My hours were cut, they were affecting my mental health, and I needed a change. I applied for another job and was quite confident I'd get it. My plan was to schedule 2 weeks off from work around the time this new start date would be. My supervisor didn't even want me to take time off, despite the fact that I hadn't taken any time off in 2 years. Fast forward to the day before my 2-week vacation, I got the job. I showed up at my old job when I wasn't scheduled and asked to speak with my supervisor. We talked, and I quit. She was acting all happy that I was leaving, but I didn't care. I was over it. The supervisor made it clear that I was still required to work all my shifts for the next 2 weeks, and I had better not slack off. I smiled at her, thanked her for acknowledging my work ethic, and then placed my name tag and keys on her desk. She looked confused. I reminded her that I had taken 2 weeks off, so this was goodbye. I turned around and left. My mental health has been so much better without her, and the store is now permanently closed. Our next Reddit post is from Mama Hannah. A couple of summers ago, I took a part-time job as a server at a local restaurant. I already had a full-time job, so this was just for experience and to earn some extra tip money. The pub within the restaurant had been shut down for a few years after the previous owner couldn't maintain it. So when the new owners acquired it and prepared it for reopening, the town was quite enthusiastic. It's a bit of a local landmark, situated right in the middle of our main street. I applied as soon as I heard and ended up getting hired. I was one of the younger servers, working alongside a few older ones. Most of us were women, and the more experienced servers really looked out for us newcomers. Overall, the rest of the team was very pleasant, except for a couple of unpleasant individuals. My new boss, Gary, was, well, not as great. Gary's favorite saying was, "If you have time to lean, you have time to clean." He believed that if we took even a second to catch our breath, he was losing money due to our slacking. On slow days, he would invent trivial, meaningless tasks for us to complete. Wipe the bar counter, even though it had been wiped 3 times in the last half hour. Reorganize the menus, despite them already being perfectly organized. Fill up more condiment cups, even though there were already 50 salsa cups ready to go. Things like that. The most tedious task, particularly in the early summer months, was sweeping the side alley that led to the patio. There were huge maple trees lining the path, and they would shed leaves and seeds incessantly, especially on windy days. One afternoon in early June, only a few of us were working. Things slow down, and I'm assigned the sweeping task. I sweep up the back alley as much as possible, but the wind is blowing, and the trees just keep dropping more and more seeds onto the path. I do my best until a coworker calls me back inside to help serve tables. She didn't want me to miss out on tips, bless her. I seat the table, take their orders, and begin entering them. Just then, Gary storms up to me. "What are you doing? Entering table 15's order. Why? The side alley is a mess. I don't pay you to slack off." I swept up as much as I could before the table came in. It's a really windy day. That's why it keeps getting filled with leaves and seeds. You're more than welcome to check the compost bin to see how much I actually did sweep up. No, we do not finish things halfway here. You're going back out there and finishing your job. I want it to be spotless. The other waitress, Linda, can take table 15. Gary then transferred table 15 from my account to Linda's. Linda and I get along great. Linda told me, "I'll hold on to your share of the tips. Best not to make Gary angry. He really wants me to make it spotless. Does he know how impossible that is? I'd have to be out there all shift." That's when Linda gave me a smile and the light bulb went off in my head. I still had 2 hours left in my shift, and it was heading straight into the dinner rush. I grabbed the broom and dustpan and got to work. I would sweep up as much as I could, but every so often another strong breeze would come by, and hundreds more helicopter seeds would flutter to the ground. I just kept going. At this point, it started getting busier inside the restaurant. A line began to form outside the door. Linda was taking care of my tables, but very soon it became clear that the service needed another person to help. Linda explained the situation, and most of the customers, who tolerated Gary at best and detested him at worst, understood. I kept on sweeping. Like Sisyphus with his boulder, the task was never ending. I scooped up pile after pile after pile of leaves and seeds, to no avail. After about 45 minutes, the side door suddenly opened to reveal a red-faced Gary. "Why aren't you in there serving customers?" I just gestured at the alleyway, as if the gods themselves had heard the malicious compliance brewing. Another strong breeze shook more seeds into the partially cleared alley right in front of Gary's face. The look on his face was priceless. He told me in a quieter voice to get back inside and start taking orders. I handed the broom off to him, and he began to sweep and sweep and sweep. The other servers and I had a good laugh about it inside, and I managed to earn decent tips that night. Gary realized he couldn't exactly fire me for perfectly following his orders, and ended up being more relaxed about the side alley. No one truly cares about a few leaves and seeds on the ground, as long as they're not blocking anyone. On my next shift, I discovered a broken broom in the garbage. I'd like to believe that was Gary's doing, red-faced and exhausted from battling against Mother Nature. In the comments, I'm going to read this post from Historical Turn. Some say that if you listen closely when the wind blows, you can still hear Gary sweeping. Our next Reddit post is from Uchaypinska. I worked for a major government contractor, serving a government agency. I had advanced through the ranks because I possess strong technical knowledge and have a talent for seeing the bigger picture. which helps me identify potential problems. I was very good at what I did. Many managers disliked me because I pointed out issues and stated facts, without regard for management politics, and I never flattered anyone. Some managers even gave one of my colleagues, Bob, credit for my work simply for being a sycophant. Then they desperately needed my technical expertise on a very large project, worth over $10 million. I wrote most of the technical specifications, identifying risk areas and the consequences of poor procurement decisions. Bob dismissed my arguments as, "That's no big deal and we can work around that." So management ignored me and ended up purchasing inadequate equipment. I was reassigned again, and Bob was given what should have been my job, which came with a promotion and a significant raise. My parting gift to the project managers was a detailed memo, highlighting every technical problem I foresaw and how it could have been avoided. It was a very long list of nearly 100 watch items, and they ended up encountering almost all of them. As usual, management ignored me. Due to company policy and excellent performance reviews, management couldn't fire me immediately, but I could tell I was being set up for termination. I was assigned a role working directly with a customer as a liaison, actually situated at the customer's site. Management figured I would be irritating and distract the customer from the company's issues. In the meantime, I'd keep our company informed about what the customer was saying behind closed doors. And I was supposed to tell the customer what management wanted me to say was happening at the company. Management intended it to be a do-nothing job to keep me out of sight and out of mind. However, I don't do do-nothing jobs. I take my job seriously. But after a couple of months, management told me in no uncertain terms that I was not allowed to answer the customer's questions about what was going on inside the company regarding the project, and that I was not allowed to speak at internal company meetings where the customer's needs were being discussed. I was muzzled and set up for failure, or so they thought. Now comes the malicious compliance that ended with revenge. When the customer would ask me a question, my responses were pretty much like, "I'm not permitted to tell you whether the project is significantly over budget," or "Management won't let me tell you whether or not the company is dropping design requirements for features A and B." I explicitly complied with management's directive of not answering the customer's questions, but I slipped in enough hints in my non-answers that the customer knew where to look and what questions to ask. The customer also kept meeting minutes and recordings that reflected that I did not answer questions about the subject under discussion, which was technically the truth. This was very critical later. Eventually, management couldn't hide that the project was way behind schedule and significantly over budget, which didn't surprise the customer thanks to my hints. The customer absolutely tore the company apart in their periodic contract performance review. Note that on government contracts, it's extremely difficult to receive a low performance score. My company got a very low performance score. It was ugly. And the company lost a lot of contract bonuses, which would have been a large portion of profits and management bonuses. And Bob was under so much stress, trying to solve the problems I'd warned him about, that he suffered a major heart attack and had to retire on medical disability at the age of 42. Naturally, management wanted me to be the scapegoat so they could fire me. But the customer liked how I worked, and they protected me with very careful language in the performance appraisals. Essentially, I was the only person in my company doing my job correctly. Upper management didn't dare fire me, or they'd anger the customer even more than they already had, possibly to the point of having the contract terminated for non-performance. One particularly nasty manager, who really hated me, had to give me a significant pay raise and bonus because of my work. The fallout from the review was bad enough that corporate headquarters did some management shuffling, and a few of my antagonists were suddenly gone. My raise and promotion ended up not mattering because the customer hired me directly to work on the same project, but on their side. This caused management to absolutely freak out because I knew all their dirty secrets and tricks. However, I never ratted on my former employer. I didn't have to. Thanks to my help, my new coworkers had already figured out where to focus their attention and what questions to ask to get past the company's BS. I complied strictly with the terms of quitting from that company and revealed no secrets after I left. One of the best parts was that during meetings, all I had to do was put on an evil grin, and my former managers would freak out, wondering if I was about to unearth one of their skeletons. I never did. I just enjoyed watching them squirm. They became so paranoid about being caught lying to the government that they started admitting bad news up front. Because of this, things got even worse for the company. They decided to try unleashing their legal hounds on me for violating company non-disclosure agreements. But the customers' meeting minutes proved that I hadn't disclosed anything. The contract was restructured to eliminate several blind spots the company had used to its advantage. The customers' oversight of the company increased significantly. Profit margins on their contract shrank. Several of management's favorite employees were suddenly sending out resumes because their protection was disappearing. Even more managers retired or found other jobs. It was glorious to watch, doubly so because I let them do it to themselves. And I was extremely happy in my new job, where I still work today. Our next Reddit post is from StressFart. Problems. The owner of our company wouldn't stand up to clients who made unreasonable demands, were excessively cheap, or were simply very disrespectful. This often resulted in us performing tasks beyond our usual scope, at a loss, and frequently being sworn at, without cause. Among the programs we supported was Microsoft 365, which, as you know, is widely used for email services. One of our clients was a fairly large dental practice. They operated around 10 locations and were expanding. Their customers adored them, and we often enjoyed going on site because it was a pleasure dealing with such courteous individuals, unlike what we typically encountered most of the time. They'd even treat us to lunch if we were there during Friday lunchtime. It was wonderful. They utilized Microsoft 365 services, which was completely excessive. They paid $20 per user each month when most employees hardly ever checked email, much less created an Excel document. They declined our suggestion to use Essentials at $5 per user instead. Additionally, they experienced a rather high turnover rate since it was a college town. Their student staff would frequently come and go. The IT director at this company, who was quite poor at his job, called us one day swearing because numerous mailboxes lacked licenses. We attempted to clarify that these were shared mailboxes from former employees. This lets us remove the mailbox's license while keeping all emails intact and readily accessible if we need to grant access to someone for review. Essentially, you get to archive the mailbox at no cost. He hardly allowed us to speak, and the technician on the call was so flustered that I took over. Employing my most well-practiced customer service charm, I attempted to clarify the situation for him, but it was useless. They had 180 unused email accounts remaining from employees who had departed, and he insisted they all be converted to premium email accounts at $20 per month each. Just to be clear, that amounts to $3,600 in recurring monthly fees to activate email accounts for staff no longer employed there. He resorted to personally insulting me, stating that I was just a tech promoted too quickly and should consider a 4-year school next time, and he insisted it be done immediately, without any specifics on the process. Bless your heart, man. All right, we'll do it. Specifics on how it gets done. Bless your heart, man. All right, we'll do it. Fortunately, we record all calls. I should also mention that this company maintains a policy against our use of PowerShell, which, for those unaware, is a programming tool that saves time. I had repeatedly pleaded with them to permit us to use PowerShell previously, but it was useless. Consequently, we ordered pizza for the office and began our task. We converted every single email to a premium account and licensed each one. It was a lengthy but enjoyable night of work. A month or so passed, and our accountant dispatched all our invoices to our clients. The dental IT guy called us 3 minutes after receiving his invoice, having completely lost his temper. He finally saw the bill for the additional 180 email licenses, plus taxes and fees. He was threatening to sue me and my 2 coworkers if we didn't rectify it. One redeeming quality about our utterly compliant owner was that he didn't take kindly to anyone directly insulting his employees. He took it personally because he had personally interviewed everyone. So we implored him to listen to the recorded call, which he did. He was displeased by what he heard during that phone call. He didn't yield to his demands. In fact, he added a surprising flourish we hadn't witnessed previously. He highlighted that, given the written policy against using PowerShell, we should have categorized the request as a project, especially since they insisted on its completion within such a short time frame, and it wasn't a standard support inquiry. This implied that until they compensated us for both of these projects, we would not address their malfunctioning emails. Our project fee was $125 per hour for junior technicians and $175 for senior technicians. In total, it would amount to approximately 12 hours of payment, all at the senior rate. This IT imbecile was unaware that the owner of his company and the owner of my company had been friends for almost 2 decades. They frequently played golf together. We arranged for the owners of both businesses to visit our office, and before they could even greet us, we played the complete phone recording for each owner. The owner of the dental company was utterly stunned at what he heard. The IT idiot was ashen as he sat there and remained completely still. The owner offered heartfelt apologies to the technicians, and it seemed like he was nearly in tears. He issued a check to cover our bill, and we agreed to reverse the work without charge, because he was a truly excellent client of ours, and consistently pleasant. The owner presented each of us with $100 gift cards the following week and treated us to lunch at our office on several occasions, entirely at his own expense. The IT idiot was terminated the moment the owner returned to his office, and the owner tasked us with repairing his email systems. The owner heeded all our suggestions, including downgrading the license type for most of their employees. He appeared puzzled as to why he initially had premium email accounts in the first place. That is the one company I genuinely miss from my previous employment. He was a truly excellent client. I feel like I offer this advice frequently, but I will repeat it now because it seems people aren't paying attention. Never mess with the IT guys. Our next Reddit post is from Sometimes Smarmy. I recently left my position at a convenience store. It was my final day of work, mere minutes prior to my shift ending. I observed a lengthy queue, and I hopped onto the till to assist. 2 customers approached the counter as a pair, and one requests cigars. Company policy and state law requires that I check the IDs of both customers. I turned to get the cigars after requesting to see both IDs, and one of the customers exits the store. Unfortunately, in this scenario, I cannot complete a sale until I see ID from both customers, even if one departs. I inform the customer of this, and he argues. My manager is at the register right beside me, so I clarify to the man that no, I need to see the ID, or I cannot sell age-restricted items to either customer. It's now 10:02, and my shift officially concluded at 10 o'clock, though we're permitted and encouraged to remain clocked in during a busy period. The customer asserts that he doesn't know the other individual, despite it being evident they were together. Annoyed, but simply wishing to conclude this interaction, I say, whatever, and prepare the terminal to accept his card. He puts his card in, and the reader asks, "Is this amount correct?" or something similar, and the customer hits no. Many customers do this. They fail to read the screen and believe it's asking if they want cash back. But if they hit no, it voids the transaction. Ordinarily, we would just reset it, guiding them through to make sure they hit the correct button. But then I think, what's going to happen? It's my last day. I'm meant to be clocked out. I have no concern for this job. And company policy forbids managers from providing references anyway. I say, okay, you hit no, so good night. And I put the cigars back and clock out. After punching out, I mentioned it to the manager, who reported that the customer seemed bewildered for a moment, and then simply gave up and departed. utterly perplexed. Our next Reddit post is from Semi-Tune-Up. His English was shaky at best. He grasped what others were saying, but struggled to clearly convey his own intentions in response. Conversely, my father had no understanding of Italian, yet spoke flawless English. And my father was a skilled mechanic, who would proceed to make this machine bay function like a finely tuned engine. With my father overseeing, tasks were accomplished. And even if he didn't always comprehend what the boss expected, he would simply concentrate on his hiring objectives, oversee the repair bay, recruit new mechanics, train new staff, and handle on-call service. Eventually, the boss man became convinced that my father was going to supersede him as the company's CEO. Given that my father was far more popular, spoke flawless English in an English-speaking nation, and virtually all department heads sought his assistance. Even though technically my father was solely responsible for the repair bay. And so the boss summoned my father to the office, reprimanded him severely, and managed to convey that he was being dismissed for inadequate work performance. My father merely smiled, shook the man's hand, and departed. And due to the boss's less than solid command of both the English language and business law, the boss simply sent him off with his final paycheck and nothing further. So my father launched his own enterprise in the heavy equipment mechanics sector. After informing all his former colleagues about the predicament, he promptly gained numerous new employees. And unexpectedly, his old workplace had many vacant positions that the boss had no clue how to staff, because he had just dismissed the individual he'd employed to recruit and instruct new staff. His business failed 6 months afterward. Occasionally, my father drives by the former shop's location, and each time he just laughs heartily. I can't confirm this. I was let go from my previous job, and now that I'm a professional YouTuber, every time I pass that office, it brings a smile to my face. Our next Reddit submission comes from Rexington. I'm employed at a highly popular pizza franchise. Today, my manager informed me that instead of not picking up the phone before we open, I now must answer calls and enter orders as timed ones. I also need to tell patrons that their order won't be prepared until 11. I suppose my manager is aiming for increased sales. I'm not sure. Enter malicious compliance, and this morning we coincidentally received many calls. By 10:45, I already had 10 orders, and that was also when the initial customer arrived. The problem here, you see, is that company policy dictates we cannot unlock the doors until 11. We're permitted to send out deliveries ahead of time, but we cannot open for early carryout. As you can imagine, this customer became enraged when I informed him he'd have to wait until 11 before I could serve him, owing to company policy. Well, the icing on the cake is that my manager heard the disturbance and chose to disregard the rule. In walks my boss's boss, who oversees and trains the managers. He witnesses what my boss is doing, and my boss immediately faces consequences. After my boss's boss reprimanded my boss for a bit, my boss pulled me aside and stated that we are no longer accepting early orders, nor are we permitting customers to enter the store early. Our next Reddit post is from Lynn7. I once hosted an event in a bar. It was a kind of celebration for police trainees, new recruits, that sort of thing. Anyway, as I was diligently working, pouring drinks and so forth, this one woman, who was utterly conceited, was observing me pour measures for another customer. She made remarks about the amount of ice in the drinks, how I was using the incorrect glass, I wasn't, and other irritating comments about how she was waiting to be served and had arrived first. She hadn't. I was pouring some spirits. I reached the end of the bottle as I was dispensing whiskey, and there was a minuscule drop remaining. So I simply poured those few extra milliliters into the glass, which you shouldn't really do. But who cares, right? Anyway, this woman got right in my face about how it's technically against the law to pour extra measures, and that the law is the law, and that I should adhere to the law precisely. I attempted to dismiss it, ignore her, and continued serving other patrons. Yet there she remained, scrutinizing nearly everything I did. And as anyone who has been in customer service will confirm, you understand how frustrating it is to have every action dissected and criticized as if you're merely a worthless piece of trash. So when it was her turn, she requested an alcoholic drink. Utilizing my limited authority, I asked her for her identification. Her face turned crimson, and she stammered something about being old enough to be a police officer. I informed her, "Apologies. If you lack identification, I cannot legally serve you. The law is indeed the law, after all." And predictably, she didn't possess ID, and was compelled to settle for lemonade. OP, you ought to have attempted to have the other officers arrest her for trying to buy alcohol without identification. In the comments below, we have this anecdote from Cafe Saigon. A police officer once flashed his badge at me when I tried to verify his ID while working at a liquor store, and he became annoyed when I didn't accept it. I mean, I'm just upholding the law here, pal. What's that phrase police officers always favor? Sorry, sir, I don't create the law. I merely enforce it. Our next Reddit submission is from Grab the Muffin. I was recalling memories after causing a kind nurse to shiver when I cracked my knuckles during my doctor's appointment. It brought to mind a humorous tale involving my mother. My mother utterly detested it whenever I cracked my knuckles in her presence. I can't restrain myself. It's a poor habit. And once I crack one knuckle, I feel compelled to crack every single one. She would consistently admonish me to stop. She would even tell me it was detrimental and would cause arthritis. One day at home, I began making my fingers sound like Rice Krispie treats. Snap, crackle, and pop. Mom had endured enough and lost her temper. I want you to write a 2-page essay about cracking your fingers, including information about arthritis. No more than double-spaced, 12-point font, and all that. I don't want you trying anything funny. Well, naturally, I'm going to attempt something humorous. We wouldn't be here if I didn't. So, cue malicious compliance. I sat at the computer, opened Google, and typed in, "How cracking your fingers does not cause arthritis." It turns out I was correct. I found numerous sources, including one individual, who regularly cracked the knuckles on one hand but never on the other. The uncracked hand developed arthritis, while the cracked hand did not, and not at all on the other. The uncracked hand got arthritis, and the cracked hand did not. I did incorporate some factual points, such as how it led to a loss of grip, but ultimately the essay focused on how it helped avert arthritis in the long run. She took the essay without a word, quickly reviewed it, and to my astonishment deemed it acceptable. I couldn't believe I managed to get away with it, but I also recalled that my paper was mentioned in a conversation during my adult years, before cancer took my mom. What did I tell you about cracking your knuckles? I made you write an essay on that and everything. You didn't read that essay, did you? What makes you think that? I gave her a smile like a fox in a henhouse. Because I wrote the paper about how cracking knuckles prevents arthritis. My mom gave me a surprised Pikachu face. No, you didn't. I cited sources and everything. You brat? The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, Mom. I loved my mom. Our next Reddit post is from Mayan. Several years ago, I was employed by a small local outsourcing firm. I was tasked with assisting one of their particularly high-profile clients. The client's office was only a short distance from my workplace, but my employer demanded I stay in the office to perform my duties. Therefore, the client supplied me with a laptop that connected to their network remotely. It's worth mentioning that while my client was fair, my employer operated with a completely fear-driven management culture. Managers wanted constant oversight of staff, believing people would shirk their duties if given any opportunity. After nearly a year on the job, I received a call from the client informing me that my client-provided laptop required some crucial updates, and I'd need to bring it to their office for their IT department to install them locally. This all seemed quite logical to me. I informed my manager of this, letting them know I'd be out of the office for a short period to take my laptop to the client site nearby for these crucial updates. No bueno. My manager disregarded all mention of the critical updates and instead fixated on the 2 hours I'd be out of the office. They maintained that they knew I had a remote connection to the client's office, so any updates could be installed without me having to leave and take my laptop. I gathered they suspected I was fabricating an excuse to get some time away. I concluded that this situation could offer my managers a valuable lesson about not trusting their own staff. So, acting as the ideal employee I was, I simply shrugged. "You know best, boss," and went along with the demand, carrying on with my work as normal. Then the next morning, I powered on my laptop, and absolutely nothing functioned. My laptop wouldn't connect to the client's remote network. The different software programs I used for my role also failed to operate because of the missing connection. Error messages appeared on every file I attempted to open, indicating my credentials had been blocked. I was left with what amounted to a very costly paperweight. My manager was furious when I clarified that I couldn't perform any work. They clicked around on my laptop, attempting to fix it themselves, but no other remedy was available. They dispatched me to the client's office just around the corner, so I could deliver my laptop to IT. I took my leisure, enjoying a coffee and breakfast at the client's on-site cafe, while IT attended to my laptop. However, when I went to inquire about it after an hour, I recall the client IT manager's exact words were, "It's FI'd." The crucial update mentioned earlier was meant to fix an issue with how the remote connections functioned. Since my machine didn't receive the update, it lost its link to the client's network and instantly blocked me from everything, essentially blacklisting my credentials. The IT manager clarified they'd need to construct an entirely new machine for me and establish new accounts, a procedure that would require roughly a week to guarantee everything was properly configured and testable. The client was agreeable and empathetic regarding the situation, however. Upon my return to my employer's office without the laptop, my manager became exceedingly unpleasant with me, and he demanded that I still perform my duties by some means. I noted that I lacked a client laptop to use, so rather than dismissing me, they compelled another employee to share her computer. Over the following week, my colleague and I alternated using her computer, each for an hour at a time. As I lacked access to my files, client data, and so forth, I could only manage the absolute minimum of tasks, sending a handful of emails from my colleague's account. After 7 days, I received my new client laptop, and matters reverted to their usual state. Yet, that week of computer sharing resulted in my employer forfeiting approximately 40 hours of output from 2 staff members. The mutual hardship of the experience with my colleague fostered a stronger bond between us. And when my employer's contract with a client ended some years later, she assisted me in securing a new position with my employer's rival. So, OP, you were employed by an outsourcing firm that wouldn't even permit its staff to go outdoors? It's hardly surprising they forfeited that client. Our next Reddit submission is from Maidboxer. I serve as a secretary for a medical establishment that provides funding to other healthcare organizations. I'm also responsible for arranging their travel to conventions and conferences. Each year, there's a very large, heavily attended conference that invites our medical professionals to give presentations. One particular presenter, who's a huge Karen, is always incredibly challenging because she believes she's superior to us common folk and constantly reminds us of it. As presenters, they are assigned specific hotels that are reserved for them at a discounted rate. However, most of these hotels are quite far from the convention venue, and attendees end up spending a lot on taxis. I arranged travel for a minimum of 10 individuals, and I discovered a way, through a loophole, to book them into the hotel where the conference actually takes place. So I started doing that, rather than letting the conference coordinators book them in who knows where at the 11th hour, as they often tend to do. Karen approached me, insisting that I only reserve her a room in the hotel specified on the conference coordinator's website, and if I failed to comply, she'd have me written up. So that's what I did. The day prior to their departure for the conference, which was incidentally on the opposite side of the country, Karen discovered she was the sole person not booked into the conference hotel. Instead, she had been booked 9 miles distant. She was absolutely furious and marched over to my desk, shouting about my decision to place her so far away in a 2-star accommodation. I looked at her and calmly responded that she was in one of the 3 hotels the conference coordinators had set aside, and she specifically told me to choose only those hotels and no others. She wound up spending over $70 in taxi fares to and from the location, whereas everyone else merely needed to descend from their hotel rooms. She also missed giving her presentation because she was late. After that, whenever I booked everyone for trips, Karen stopped insisting on special treatment. Instead, she just allowed me to use my discretion when reserving hotels. Down in the comments, we have this story from Ogioni. I recall a remark by a senior corporate executive. When he changed positions, his secretary moved with him. It was even stipulated in his contract, and she was very generously compensated. He stated, "She enables me to perform my duties." And when asked if he had to pick between his spouse or his secretary, he said, "My secretary Alice has supported me through 4 marriages." And then beneath that, we have another story from Living Complex. The account I heard was that in the 80s, companies questioned, "Why are we paying so many secretaries $10 an hour?" So they dismissed the majority of them. It took a few years for them to grasp they were now compensating executives $150 an hour to handle the tasks secretaries had been performing, and doing so less effectively than the secretaries themselves. So they tried to rehire the secretaries, but half of them had found other employment, and the rest demanded twice the wage and a better job title. Our next Reddit post is from Leith Chin. I used to work as a dedicated inventory guy for a tire and wheel store that dealt exclusively in tires and wheels. It was a major chain. All the employees wore black, not by choice, even on the most scorching days. After nearly 10 years there, I was the sole person managing their approximately 5,000 to 7,000 tires, along with several hundred wheels, nuts, bolts, tire lube, replacement parts, and so on. Essentially, I organized the entire store in terms of what was purchased, sold, or utilized. I also processed all our incoming shipments, whether it was a single tire delivered by FedEx or one of our twice-weekly deliveries of 400, 800 tires. Technically, my position was supposed to be shared by 3 individuals. The manager I worked with for most of those 10 years was very pleased with and supportive of me, striving to ensure I was looked after if I needed assistance. Regrettably, the company underwent a series of terrible changes after the owner of the entire chain passed away. It transitioned from a family business to a for-profit micromanagement style operation. My excellent manager became stressed and went from being great to less than ideal. I won't deny that some of his actions made me quite upset. Ultimately, he was moved to a new administrative role to see out his retirement, and we acquired a new manager along with numerous additional salespeople. I remained in inventory because everyone concurred I was the sole person for the job who possessed any knowledge. They attempted to assign me new hires to train, but I only had a few days with them before they were reassigned to more important tasks. Eventually, they ceased caring and presumed I would handle inventory indefinitely. Well, as 2018 drew to a close, I began seeking other prospects. This wasn't solely due to the workplace changes. Rather, performing a 3-person job for 10 years was starting to strain my back. I can't deny I was becoming somewhat fearful that I might inflict irreparable damage to my back that would persist indefinitely. Management consistently opposed my proposals to reorganize the stock, citing that different brands don't require identical amounts of space. For instance, that prominent tire brand that performed exceptionally well 3 years prior and occupied space for 1,000 tires was now only taking up room for 400 tires. But then I have this other brand for which we used to stock 250 tires, but now we're ordering hundreds of them weekly, and we genuinely require an additional 750 units of space. Consequently, one section would be overstocked, and another would be understocked. As I entered the final weeks of my lovely tenure there, I reminded management they should locate someone I could brief before it was too late. My new manager informed me, using very professional and polite language, to simply do my work and let them handle the concern. I then understood that truly, this was their problem, not mine. Malicious compliance ensued. I discovered an opportune moment when management was occupied. 2 were in meetings with corporate for 3 days, and 1 was on vacation for the remainder of the week. This was flawless timing, as it was also my final week. I worked tirelessly that week. I reorganized the entire area to my meticulous specifications. I wanted everything to fit. I wanted everything perfectly presentable. I did it my way, and I managed to make everything fit. Brands were relocated, and I left notes. I informed all my preferred coworkers who handled my inventory about the changes. They adjusted immediately because honestly, it's not that difficult. They praised my efforts and thanked me for doing that before I departed. However, I anticipated what was coming. A couple of months into my new role, I began receiving calls from my former coworkers. Apparently, they made no attempt to replace me at all, and things started falling apart. Tires were crammed into the racks with no regard for their proper location. If an empty space appeared, they simply filled it with whatever tire was available. After 3 months, I learned 3 longtime employees resigned because the disorganization severely hampered their service times for vehicles, which led to a cascading effect of heightened stress and an unhealthy atmosphere. It used to take on average just 15 minutes for us to service a single car, but currently it was requiring 15 minutes solely to locate the correct tires. And sometimes they even ceased searching and had to drive to another nearby store to find the right tire, assuming an inventory discrepancy. Obviously, the postponements and ineffectiveness angered the managers toward everyone, and service techs usually bore the brunt of the criticism. I wish I could say I had more compelling specifics about the aftermath, but after a certain point, all my contacts within that store had departed. I feel like that speaks volumes on its own. 4 or 5 months later, one of the managers called me on my personal phone. They asked how I was doing and inquired if my new position was satisfactory. I was very happy, and I enthusiastically conveyed how pleased I was with my new job. He inquired whether I might be interested in assisting at the store once more. I declined. Now, I'm not the best at interpreting others, but this person seemed so despondent in their voice that I can only guess they had so little success in locating a replacement for what I did. I'm much more valued now in my new job. Our next Reddit post is from Cleefish. So a few years ago, my dad was moving out of his house and in with his parents due to some health concerns. Our next Reddit post is from Cleefish, whereas I'm the type of person who would alphabetize my entire bookshelf with a comprehensive system. I'm genuinely a type A personality, and I appreciate maintaining organization. You might find it odd, but I genuinely take pleasure in tidying and rearranging. It simply resonates with me. Given that my dad had roughly 2 months before the house sale finalized, I began packing up parts of the residence for him. His basement was chaotic, and I'd wanted to organize it for ages. Consequently, within the initial day, I had made considerable progress in the basement, which proved to be a quite complex undertaking. I hadn't grasped when we initially moved in that much of the belongings from our previous home remained haphazardly packed, as my brother and I were too young to genuinely assist. Thus, I proceeded to unpack the boxes still containing items from the old house, label them logically, and then repack them suitably. After roughly 3 days of this, I reached about the halfway mark, having cleaned and packed my room and a portion of the garage. Now for the prelude to the malicious compliance. My dad descended into the basement to assist me, which I was perfectly fine with. I began clarifying where items belonged, and my dad wished to alter my method. I objected, pointing out that I already had a system in place and had already completed the majority of the packing. So he should probably just follow my lead on this, but that's when he hit me with my house, my rules. I gave in because I knew what would transpire. Anyone who's truly type A will concur with me that the only thing more aggravating than utter chaos and disarray is when things are slightly out of order, which is precisely what I anticipated. Despite the disagreement my dad and I had, he ultimately almost adhered to my system. For the most part, items belonging in the labeled boxes were where they should be, save for a few crucial miscellaneous things that were placed, well, not where they belonged. I noticed this, but because of my dad's my house, my rules, he clearly had a plan, so I remained silent. I knew the gratification would be a gradual process, and it arrived several months later when I was at school across the country and unable to assist. My dad called me one day, highly agitated because he couldn't locate something he needed. He had been in his rented storage unit for the better part of 3 hours searching for it. Now, the moving crew had packed the storage unit dreadfully. I'd been in there a few times and genuinely feared for my safety. It's a true labyrinth/jungle gym and a nightmare to navigate. Not to mention, this was midsummer, and there was no air conditioning. So my dad is angry and on the phone with me, asking where this item is, and I ask him if it's in the box I labeled, in big red Sharpie. Important stuff. He says no, and I subtly grin. Then he says, "Well, you were responsible for packing all this, and now I can't locate it." That's when I calmly reminded him of the heated argument we had over this very matter, and how he took control of my system afterward. I informed him that if I had genuinely been in charge, the item would have been in the box, marked important stuff. He hung up on me after that. I love my dad, and I had no issue assisting him. We often laugh about that incident these days, but I can't deny that I found it quite amusing to imagine him sweating and swearing, clambering around in that dreadful storage unit death trap. He recently found a new place to live now that my grandparents have more in-home support, and I've already arranged to come help them move. We've already agreed that this time I'm in command. So when it comes to this story, I'm like OP's dad. I'm chaotic, disorganized. My wife, conversely, is the complete and total opposite. One of the best qualities about my wife is that she's an incredible organizer. And one of the worst qualities about my wife is that she's an incredible organizer. I totally empathize with OP's dad. The truth is, for people like us, it's simply in our nature to resist organization at every conceivable moment. However, the unfortunate reality is that the world simply desires to be organized, and it's better when it is. So, enduring organization projects is simply sheer agony for someone like me. And it's exacerbated when the organized person starts directing your actions. Put this here. Put that there. That doesn't go there. What are you doing? You're doing everything wrong. Blah, 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 blah. But in my experience, regrettably, the wisest course of action is to simply set aside your ego, yield, and just follow what the organized person tells you to do, because in every instance, they consistently prove correct. Our next Reddit post is from J Crime. I worked as a medic in Salt Lake City for a few years. One rainy day, my partner and I were sent to a rather upscale neighborhood for a call about chest pain. Chest pain calls mean flashing lights and sirens. We quickly arrived in front of a quite nice house and found a woman standing at the curb with 2 packed suitcases. This is already a red flag. I turned off the siren but kept the lights on for safety. We asked if she had called 911, and she confirmed. She stepped into the ambulance, sat on the bench, and asked us to leave. I told her we needed to do a full workup before departing, so we could provide proper care and transport her to the correct facility. She stated she didn't actually have chest pain, but had a procedure scheduled at the hospital, and wanted me to turn off the flashing lights so her neighbors wouldn't notice and ask her questions. Clearly, this was an abuse of emergency medical services, and I informed her of that. Suddenly her chest pain returned, so I said I needed to get vitals and start an ECG. She protested again, mentioning her appointment's start time was less than 30 minutes away, and so I asked her point blank, "Do you need medical attention or do we have to call the cops?" I proceeded to do a full workup in front of her house, taking my sweet time. I asked enough questions to make her eyes roll, and I left the strobe lights on the entire time so the neighbors would see. And she was late for her appointment because we admitted her to the hospital through the ER instead of the main entrance. Hey, I'm not a doctor or a nurse, and I don't know much about medical procedures, but I would have to assume that if you're a doctor about to perform a procedure, when I hear procedure, I think surgery. If you're about to perform surgery on a woman, and she's scheduled to, say, come in at 2 p.m. for the surgery, but she arrives at the hospital at 1:30 p.m., complaining of such severe chest pain that she called a 911 ambulance to bring her there, wouldn't you simply not do the surgery? Right? Clearly, if she has chest pains, that's a larger problem than the surgery, and perhaps you should figure that out before doing the surgery, right? If there are any nurses or doctors out there who watch my content, could you please let me know in the comments if I'm right about this? Because it just seems to me that they would surely cancel her appointment, right? And if I'm right, then this makes it much funnier. Because in addition to canceling her appointment, she just had a huge ambulance medical bill. Our next Reddit post is from Kim Blake. I have a full-time job with hourly pay. However, my job requires me to work overtime every few weeks during busy seasons because that's simply the nature of the job. On Monday, my general manager got upset with my coworker, asking why she had gone into overtime last week. She simply replied, "Well, you had me work 6 days straight, and on all those days I was expected to put in a full 8-hour day. If you don't want me to hit overtime, don't schedule me for 6 straight days." Moving on to Tuesday. After that coworker informed me about the discussion she and the general manager had, I was told I'd be working 7 straight days. I pointed out that this would lead me into overtime, so my coworker advised me to inform the general manager. I was informed, "No overtime unless it's approved." I replied, "That's fine. Friday will be my day off then, so don't contact me about work-related matters." Today is Friday, and I took the day off. Work was constantly buzzing my phone with urgent things they needed assistance with, but I spent my day contentedly on the couch, searching for a rental for my upcoming vacation. Either compensate me for the overtime or don't complain when tasks aren't completed. Our next Reddit post is from Magnus40. For context, I was employed by a company that manufactured test equipment, primarily in the avionics field. We developed a test system for an old inertial navigation system. The inertial system tester, or IST, essentially moves the sensor across all 3 axes in a precise sequence at specific speeds and combinations, verifying accurate readings. The test system was archaic, truly archaic, even by 1980s standards. The machine simply featured a series of blinking lights and would emit clicking and whizzing sounds, resembling some sort of futuristic computer from a 1960s TV sci-fi program. Dave, our protagonist, was the only person in the company who truly understood its operation, and he had been working on it for decades. The Air Force intended to replace the navigation system with a newer model. Consequently, the test system needed to be decommissioned. Dave was a stereotypical engineer. He was highly skilled at his profession, but he had poor social skills and was unflinchingly honest. He had accumulated adversaries, but since the company required his expertise on the IST, they tolerated his demeanor. Dave was frequently dispatched to bases across the globe to assist in diagnosing issues. He was exceptionally proficient at his work, and the Air Force held him in high regard because of it. Given the impending decommissioning of the system he operated, Dave received an offer for early retirement, which he accepted. Thanks to his contacts, Dave was aware the replacement system would be postponed by a year, meaning the IST service would be prolonged. Dave possessed this knowledge before the company. Despite knowing this, Dave still retired. That was the malicious compliance. A few weeks later, a contract request arrived, asking us to modify the system tester to incorporate more contemporary technology and maintain the system for an additional year, with annual contract renewal options. As this was a straightforward add-on contract, it was approved with minimal scrutiny. Then the panic set in. No one understood how to program the system. It was coded in some archaic programming language from the 1960s, and it also utilized machine code for an antiquated processor that no one had ever worked with. No one knew where the source code had been stored, and we lacked a paper tape punching machine. We eventually located a printout of the source code with some handwritten notes, and we weren't even certain if this was the version that had been installed. But Dave knew, and Dave had been anticipating that phone call. Dave consented to return part-time as a contractor at an incredibly high hourly rate for the duration of the contract. The contract was also prolonged by another 6 months, meaning Dave worked almost until the time he would have retired anyway. However, in those final 18 months, Dave earned a substantial amount of money. I appreciate Dave. He taught me a great deal. And in the comments, we had this story from Burly Buddha. This brings to mind my grandfather's retirement. The tale is that he was employed by a major manufacturing company in Baltimore that possessed an intricate network of boilers and other steam-based systems. He served as the supervisor of the maintenance department from the 1960s until the 1980s, when he retired. He oversaw all maintenance within this elaborate system and was truly the sole individual intimately acquainted with its configuration. He understood that to service a particular pipe, you needed to shut off this valve, and that valve over there, to release the pressure so the system wouldn't rupture. Well, his chance to retire arrived, and he seized it. I'm not sure if this was due to the company being acquired, but regardless, there were no written diagrams of the system, including all its valves and checks. You'd think a company would maintain such records, but hey, what do us common folk know, right? Consequently, the only place all this information resided was in my grandfather's mind. He offered to document everything, but that would extend his work by another week beyond his retirement. The company wasn't willing to compensate him for that extra week, so he shrugged and left. Fast forward a month or two. Grandpa was enjoying not having to report to work daily. The phone rang. It was one of his former co-workers with a question about the steam network. Before the man had even completed a full sentence, my grandfather interrupted him and said something to the effect of, "Let me be clear, you don't know where XYZ is, and the system is failing with the potential for a critical breach?" The person on the phone confirmed this, and my grandpa stated, "Well, I did offer to write all this down for you, but the company didn't want to pay me for the additional week and believed it wasn't a significant issue not to have those notes. I'm retired, and it's no longer my concern, but here's what I'll do. I'll come in and assist you with your problem as a contractor. My rate is $500 per hour with a 2-hour minimum, no exceptions." The man hung up the phone, and my grandfather resumed his activities. The next morning, he received a call from the company's management, agreeing to his terms. Apparently, the day before, they had been forced to shut the system down completely, or it would have exploded. He arrived with a contract that he had them sign, then resolved the issue in 15 minutes, earning him $1,000 for it. For the next few years, they would have to call him repeatedly until they compiled their own schematic and notes on the system. Our next Reddit post is from Sniffy Nuts. Before the pandemic, my significant other and I were out shopping and decided to eat at a Harvester, which is a large chain here in the UK. It offers decent food at the more affordable end of the spectrum, and it's fine when you're not seeking a fancy dining experience or anything. They had a special offer for a soft drink, salad bar buffet, main course, and dessert, totaling $30 for 2 people. It was a great deal, so we ordered it. The food proved to be quite good. We made more than one visit to the buffet, and it's safe to say that by the time we finished our main courses, we no longer felt like having dessert. So instead, we asked the server for the bill. The bill arrived, and we had been charged an additional $9, making the total $39. I questioned the server about this. That offer is only valid with desserts, and you said you didn't want desserts anymore. We intended to have the desserts, but we're too full for them now, so we don't want them. But I didn't expect that we would be charged more. Well, you haven't ordered the offer anymore, so there's nothing we can do. Cue the malicious compliance. Well then, I'd like to order 2 desserts, please. You can bring them over, we won't eat them, and you can get the £9 removed from the bill for us. At this point, the server looked at me with a bewildered expression and said she would get the manager. My significant other, who is more reserved in these situations, looked a little uneasy. A few moments later, the manager approached and asked why we didn't want to pay. I clarified that I did intend to pay, but I wasn't going to pay more by not being wasteful. But by all means, bring over the desserts, and we'll just leave them here on the table when we depart. Once the manager understood the full situation, she simply agreed to charge us for the meal deal. And in the comments, we have this story from Androv. A little while after my second child was born, I took my older kid, who was then 3 years old, to a Harrison hot spring resort in British Columbia for the weekend to give her a small respite from the new baby. When I booked the one-night stay, there was a deal for a bed and breakfast rate, which included a room plus breakfast for 2. Upon checking in, I received 2 meal vouchers, skipping ahead to checkout. Like many, I didn't review the bill when I went to pay because I had already prepaid for the stay and had no additional charges. As I was loading the car, I glanced at the receipt and noticed an extra charge for a child's breakfast. I returned to reception and inquired about the charge, as I had paid for 2 meals in the package. They stated the charge was for a child's meal, and I had prepaid for 2 adult meals. I explained that my child was 3, only ate 1 pancake and fruit, and it was unreasonable to charge her for both an adult meal and a child's meal. I requested to speak with the customer service manager, but they wouldn't budge. I then asked to speak with the food and beverage manager, and they also wouldn't budge. So I asked for my meal voucher back since I hadn't actually used it. I examined it and noticed it had no date. So I turned to the guests behind me, waiting to check in, and asked if they had pre-purchased breakfast. They hadn't, so I handed them the voucher. I then turned back to the reception manager and proceeded to cancel the 2 other weekend stays I had booked. Our next Reddit post is from Hungry Hippo. The summer after my senior year of high school, I worked collecting shopping carts at a grocery store. I resided on the coast, so it was incredibly hot during the summers. It was one of those high-end grocery chains, so we adhered to a rather strict dress code. This included a white long-sleeve dress shirt tucked into khaki dress slacks. However, since I spent a good portion of the day working outdoors, management permitted me to wear khaki shorts and a short-sleeve button-up. Everything proceeded smoothly until the end of summer, when we acquired a new general manager who was considerably more rigid regarding policy than the previous one. When I arrived for my initial shift under the new manager, he summoned me to his office. There have been some changes. Your uniform clearly falls short in several aspects, and I will need you to rectify it. We'll require you to go home and change into pants, and the provided long-sleeve button-up. Believing he had confused me with an indoor employee, I stated, "Actually, sir, I collect carts, so I'm permitted to wear shorts." "Son," I said what I said. "Either you adhere to the dress code, or you go home. So I have no option but to wear pants in 90-degree heat at the peak of summer. That's the policy, and being clever with me isn't starting us off well. All right then, I'm going home." "Good, thank you for your understanding." I exited his office fully aware that he actually expected me to return, but his ultimatum was to either wear pants or not come to work, so I opted for the latter. I was heading off to college in a couple of weeks, so I chose not to roast alive 6 hours a day for $7.25 an hour. About an hour later, I was relaxing at home, chatting with friends on Xbox 360 Party Chat, when I received a furious call from my manager. He was asking what was taking so long, saying they were overwhelmed and desperately needed a cart collector. I informed him I wasn't returning. Naturally, he didn't react well. He ordered me to come back immediately, or I would be fired. I replied, "Well, I thought that was the intention." He was utterly bewildered. He hadn't expected me to call his bluff on something he considered so trivial. Because he wasn't the one outside pushing carts in the heat. He attempted to persuade me to come back, but I told him he gave me 2 options, and I selected option 2. I never returned to work. I later learned that cart collectors were only made to wear pants for a few days after that, and then eventually the new manager gave in and allowed them to wear shorts. I never received an apology call from them, but I didn't care. I enjoyed the time off before heading to college. I don't even comprehend why this manager was so stubborn about that. Do you genuinely want hot, sweaty teenagers perspiring all over your carts while you're handling your groceries? Because I certainly don't. Our next Reddit post is from TXG. Back in the days when concerts were still a thing, I ended up with a couple of tickets for a sold-out show. Upon arriving at the venue, I sent the rest of my family inside to see if I could sell my extra tickets. I was only asking for face value, $60. I just wanted my money back. It was a relatively small venue, so there was only one obvious scalper visible. I asked if he wanted to buy my pair of tickets, knowing he could resell them for significantly more than face value. He offered me $10 each. Take it or leave it, or see if you can get more for them. I told him I'd rather rip them up in front of him than let them go for such a low price. End of conversation. Within 5 minutes, a taxi pulled up, and a couple of people exited, desperate for a pair of tickets. The scalper was on them instantly. I slowly strolled over to join their discussion, and the scalper was just about to finalize a deal for $120 each for a pair of tickets. I leaned in and said, "Hey fellas, I've got a pair of tickets here for face value, $60 each." They were a bit skeptical, but they walked in with me to confirm their authenticity, and they paid up. "Hey, Mr. Scalper, you told me to try to get more. It's a shame it cost you your sale." In the comments, we have this story from Sazy. I have a similar experience. Muse was performing in Manchester. I purchased 6 tickets for myself and 5 friends. One friend couldn't make it, and we couldn't find anyone else to come on such short notice. My friend had paid for his ticket and mentioned that if we could sell it while we were there, we could have some drinks on him. That was kind of him, but I didn't want to have to act like a scalper, so like the original poster, I approached the scalper and asked if he wanted to buy my tickets. I don't recall the exact price he offered, but it was a similarly insulting proposal, and I told him what he could do with his offer. So I simply waited near the scalper until he was close to making a sale. Then I offered our spare ticket to the buyer for free. The customer was pleased, I was pleased, and the scalper might have attacked me if I hadn't had 5 friends and a new friend supporting me. Screw you, scalper, and Muse was fantastic.